Welcome to another episode of the Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Really excited about today's guests. We've got two amazing individuals from a really exciting company called Echo IQ, and they've got a product, My Echo. With us today is Dr. Geoffrey Strange. He's the Chief Research and Strategy Officer for Echo IQ, and then Deon Strydom, who is the Chief Commercial Officer for Echo IQ. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
You guys have been busy since the last time we talked. I hear congratulations are in order. You guys were accepted into the HeartX Accelerator at Arkansas Medical Center. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Mike. So we're very excited about this opportunity. So this was a collaboration between Health Tech Arkansas and the MedAxiom team. And what made this accelerator completely unique is it only focused on cardiovascular solutions. So to be selected as one of the 5 in the cohort is a really exciting time for us. And I believe it also gives us the credibility that we need for the US market.
It was 200 applicants and you guys were one of 5 selected?
Yeah, there was a really large cohort of applicants from global applicants from around the world, right? And as I said, the key thing with this was that only focused on cardiovascular solutions. So yeah, to get through the cohort gives us the credibility that we're after as we start our commercial launch.
That's great. I know we can't get too deep into it, but I know you guys are in deep consideration for another widely recognized accelerator here in the United States, and you guys are in final rounds for that. So wishing you guys continued success. That's amazing. We'll get into some of the stuff you guys have going here stateside with the clinical trials in a little bit. So yeah, to start the show, I usually just like to find out, kind of what was the spark? How did this whole thing come together? Obviously this was a vision in somebody's eyes, and what was the spark that made it come together? I know that's not always a short answer to a short question, but yeah, if you can, just give me a little background on that.
Yeah, look, I'd be delighted to do that. It's been a long journey. It hasn't happened overnight. It's been a lot of consideration, but really I think the spark behind this was to think differently in cardiovascular medicine. So instead of just asking the same questions with the same statistical analysis plan, cutting data exactly the same way that we've always done it, we wanted to accumulate the biggest possible data set that anyone had in the world and to truly look at statistical distributions. When you look at true statistical distributions, you then get an opportunity to ask the unknown questions. And of course, the application of machine learning, artificial intelligence to self-organize that multi-dimensional space was really critical for us. So we're focused on valvular disease first. Valvular disease is a huge unmet need globally. And that was really the impetus for us, is having this massive data set, wanting to ask questions differently, to come up with solutions to such a big problem where probably only around about 10% of patients that have significant valve disease are making it through to a therapeutic intervention. And so we wanted to come up with some strategy that would uncover these difficult to diagnose patients. And that's really where this all started.
Was this your brainchild, Dr. Strange?
Yeah, yes, it was.
It was.
I try and be as humble as I can, but actually it turns out that was a really genius stroke. I don't think that we truly knew when we thought alternative that we'd ever get to this point. But with the combination with the engineers from Echo IQ and our research team, we've really been able to bring this thing together. And I'm excited to see what the possibilities that lie ahead are.
Yeah, I want to get into the product here in a second. But if one of you can just kind of talk about how unique the process of building this was, or how integral the process of building this was from the standpoint of being able to have the national registry of patients. It's 1 million+ patients that you guys had access to, right?
Yes.
It's a very, very unique situation. We don't have that here in the United States. You have to build your data set, so to speak. So tell us a little bit more about how that played a role in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the database you're referring to is what we call NEDA. Your listeners in the States would probably refer to it as NEDA. We built this thing in a collaborative way across the Australian landscape. We now have 45 contributing centres. We linked all of the data to, in Australia, what's known as the National Deaths Index, which is a reliable indicator of mortality. In doing so, we were able to bring together the largest repository of echocardiographic output data in the world. No one had really thought of doing this at the time we started it, because the way that the vendors have structured their databases and their reporting software and their Echo service delivery, of course, it's difficult to integrate all of the outputs from different machines, different reporting software. And so we developed a vendor agnostic process of acquiring that. The background now, I guess, is we've got 2 million echoes, 1.5 million patients. We're linking all of that to mortality, morbidity, hospitalizations, pharmaceuticals, outpatient visits, emergency department interactions. And it's going to be really the largest registry database of or repository of echocardiographic parameters and all of the other things I mentioned that's really ever been put together globally. So the background here of what we did specifically for this first part was to use that large multi-dimensional parameter space, link it to mortality, and then allow the artificial intelligence to understand all the co-relationships and come up with a system where we could stratify patients between those that looked like they had a low risk for disease X, in this case aortic stenosis, a moderate risk for disease X, or a severe probability of that particular disease. And in this case, we're focusing on aortic stenosis for the first product.
The statistic is only 10% of the patients that have, significant structural heart disease. Only 10% of those patients are receiving care at present or under traditional diagnostic methods. Is that accurate?
It's almost accurate. So it's 10% of the patients that have severe aortic stenosis. So that's one form of structural heart disease. In fact, it's a problem right through the structural heart disease cascade. So we've got aortic stenosis, mitral regurgitation, tricuspid regurgitation. There's both systolic and diastolic dysfunction, hypertrophic cardiomyopathies. All of those structural changes are actually cooked, if you like, right across the board. But specifically, I was referring to aortic stenosis in this case.
Got it. And you guys are obviously, you're looking into some of those other disease states, I know, that we can get into in a little bit. So you touched on it a little bit, Dr. Strange, but can you share a little bit more about the program? I know that there's a couple people out there that are doing, parts of what you guys are doing, but it doesn't seem like there's, anybody that's got the full breadth of capability that you guys have. Can you talk to, just kind of a brief outline of the software and kind of, how it's differentiated in the market?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, we were able to work on kind of three aspects to this. So we've got 1 million plus echoes, 630,000 patients, all linked to the National Deaths Index. So then we've got the ability to train the algorithm on a subset of those patients. So about 70% get trained. And then we've got a validation process in the middle, and then a verification of those outcomes where we're able to take the outcomes in a subset of test groups, so about 30% of the population, and take that data and plug it back in to our mortality data. And so we're able to train it, verify it, and then test the mortality indicator for the outcomes of the AI. Because we've got such big data, we're able to train the algorithm in a way that it takes into account the entire structural anatomical changes across the heart. So it takes into account what happens in the left atrium, for example, in an increased pressure system. It takes into account how the ventricular or the ventricle responds, both from a pump function perspective, so systolic problems, or a muscle thickening, a diastolic problem, and then how all of that affects the pulmonary circulation, because all of those parameters are collected on echocardiography. And because we've been able to bring all of that together, we're able to truly see that multidimensional interrelationships in a way that we as humans attempt to do. But this is a uniform process, happens the same every time. It's not tired at the end of the day. It gives equitable access to everybody. It's just the same routine process, taking all of those multidimensional components into account. Differentiating from other things that are happening out there in the marketplace is that we made a call early, and I think that it's playing out well for us at the moment. We wanted to focus on something that was an immediate solution to the problems in the market, not something that's going to take 10, 20 years for the entire hardware structures to be reinvested in every hospital across the globe, with all of these automated devices that are coming through. You've got to buy new machines every single time. You've got to upgrade your software. Whereas what we want to do is have a plug and play that takes data from anywhere that it's acquired. So it doesn't matter if you're
Right.
using an automated system, an image recognition software, a point of care ultrasound. We can take all of that data and plug it into our algorithms and give you, as the treating clinician, an understanding of what to do next, how urgent it is to act, and where you should send them at an appropriate timing. And that's really where we're falling down, I think, globally, is we're not acting or reacting appropriately with the information that we've got. Because there's so much information, it's so multidimensional, people are struggling to make those concrete decisions in a timely fashion.
Dare I say it's two things. One, too much data coming at the physician all at once. And also there's an inevitable component of, human error, right? That you remove from the equation when you run something against a repeatable process like what you guys have created. Deon, how big is this market? Let's just take the aortic market. How big is this market? And we'll get into some of the regulatory issues, or not issues, but hurdles that you've got yet to clear here in the United States. But how big is the market? Do you guys estimate worldwide? And then can you tell us where you guys are at? Are you guys currently commercial over in Australia?
Yep, sure. So I'll answer in two parts. So the size of the market, you have to keep in mind that 1 out of every 8 patients over the age of 65 have some form of structural heart disease, right? And if you take something like aortic stenosis that Professor Strange mentioned earlier, you have to keep in mind that there's a 50% 2-year survival rate. So you can see that there's a real need to act really urgently. So that gives you a bit of a size of the market. The 3 conditions we're focusing on to start off with, Mike, is aortic stenosis, mitral regurgitation, and heart failure. So there's a real need, as I said, to help identify these patients earlier. And so the thing that I suppose these conditions all have in common is that they all use an echocardiogram as a primary diagnostic tool. And that's really where our AI comes to its own once it's used in that format. In terms of where we are from a commercial perspective, so just a little bit of background about the company. So Echo IQ is an Australian listed company on the ASX. Just for any of your listeners who would like to follow our stock, our ticker code is EIQ. And for your US listeners, just remember to add AU at the end of that if they're using a Bloomberg terminal. We're getting ready for commercial launch in Q1 next year, 2023. And so to prepare for that, we've done a number of things. The first thing we've done is we've appointed a president of Echo IQ USA, Donald Fowler. So Don comes to us with a tremendous amount of experience in this industry. He's very familiar with building teams and scaling technologies in the US. He had more than 20 years of experience at Siemens and was also the former CEO of Toshiba. Along with that, Mike, we've also got a number of beta sites that's currently evaluating our technology. And so the goal is to transition these sites to commercial sites early in the new year. So quite a few things on the go as we speak. And then also we're getting ready for our FDA submission. We've had our pre-sub with the FDA and we'll be submitting early in Q1 next year to the FDA.
So you guys probably anticipate approval sometime first half of next year would be my guess.
Yeah, all things going well. That's our expectation. First half next year. And as I said, all of our focus right now is purely on commercialization in the US.
Oh, got it. Okay. And you guys just recently had some positive information come out of a trial you guys ran over here, right? Was it Beth Israel?
Yeah, it was actually. So we haven't released all of the results of that particular study, but I did present.
Perhaps I'm jumping ahead here, huh?
Just a little bit. I can share with you the results that we shared at the European Society of Cardiology meeting. So that was the late breaking science. We were selected from obviously the global abstract submitters as the 3 AI groups at the hotline session, which is presented to more than 5,000 or 6,000 people in the audience with another 10,000 online, broadcast all over ESC TV. And that really was the basis of the product development, I guess, the outcomes where we were clearly able to demonstrate a difference in survival in the groups that the AI was able to differentiate. So as I said to you earlier, that low risk, medium risk, and high risk, the AI was able to clearly separate each of the groups and the phenotype, the characteristics that are present with a patient that turns up in the office with severe aortic stenosis, moderate aortic stenosis, or a low risk phenotype. And when we plug that into our mortality outcomes from our national echo database, we're able to demonstrate a huge difference in survival. So we're talking a difference between 22% survival at 5 years for an echocardiographic cohort. So these are people that have obviously had a reason to come and have an echo, versus the high risk group that the AI identified as a 67% mortality rate. So we're talking about a 50% difference in the 5-year outcome as the AI identifies this population, which is huge. It's on the back of outputs from centers like Massachusetts General. In fact, they published a paper about 2 months ago in the Journal of American College of Cardiology, where they demonstrate that they're missing up to 67% of their population with all of the indicators for valve repair or replacement, I should say. And so with this kind of an artificial intelligence algorithm plugged into that process, then all of those patients will be picked up. 100% of them will be picked up. Not a single patient within guidelines is missed. And then when we reported this at ESC, we were also able to demonstrate an additional cohort of patients that have almost identical risk as a 5% difference in their mortality at 5 years, just outside of the current guidelines. And so we're able to help the clinics form a triage process and a queue, if you like, and bring the patients back in a little bit more regularly to line them up for the appropriate intervention at the appropriate time.
Yeah, so it's not really so much prevention as it is early diagnosis, which can keep that patient from falling through the cracks.
Absolutely. And that analogy of patients falling through the cracks, unfortunately, is a real problem. You know, I think that when clinicians think about the complexity of a failing heart on a stiff valve, it's like you being completely weak, you haven't eaten for 4 days and you've got to open up a really tough door, you've got no energy to push it open. And so you can't detect the things that you'd normally detect. And that's where the AI is really, really systematically cool, because it takes that into account every time, all the time. And it helps everybody right across the globe get the same answers all the time. And that's going to just, to me, that's a transformational practice that is the reason why we got into this in the first place. It's the thing that we wanted to do. We wanted to change and help clinicians find these patients easier all the time with uniform application, which allows them to do what they do best, which is actually look after the patient. Spending all their time figuring out, is this right? Is that wrong? What does this number mean? Where does that number go? It's all kind of taken care of.
Yeah, fast forwards it to the therapeutic side of things versus wallowing in the diagnosis.
Get these patients off to the heart care team to be evaluated for what therapeutic strategy they need for what particular valve is appropriate for that patient, and get it done as soon as possible. That'll change lives.
When you guys were building this, what was the big challenge? What was the biggest challenge with, I mean, we could probably talk, we could have done a podcast on that question alone, but what was the one thing that was it building the algorithm? Was that the biggest challenge?
Perhaps we can split this question into two areas, from a commercial perspective and from a scientific perspective, if that's all right with you.
Yeah, of course.
What you said up front is the biggest challenge is acquiring this kind of data and having the foresight to think about this before a lot of others have thought about it in a way that allows us to balance the proper clinical component of this and true scientific outcomes with, a commercial kind of strategy. And when we first did this, the biggest challenge was to bring our colleagues together and get the data, right? But we didn't know in any way, shape or form what the outcome would be. We just had a group of collaborators.
You were betting on the come a little bit that it would pan out.
If we get the biggest data set possible, we'll be able to find a way of leveraging the machine learning. And we took this to our steering committee and the scientific group and said, okay, how are we going to leverage this machine learning? And they all agreed we needed a commercial entity to help us do that. And that's why the partnership with Echo IQ has been so fruitful, because of the skill that they bring in leveraging the data that we had in a commercial sense. So for me, the biggest challenge was to get that data together and then understand how to do this in a ethical and appropriate manner. And then, developing the algorithm actually wasn't as hard, and perhaps it's because we were naive. But commercializing is a different story, Deon.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think thanks, Jeff. That's right. We've been pretty fortunate, Mike, that we've always had access to net and large data, as Jeff mentioned. And the other thing that we've been very fortunate about is that our science has always been very well received by the medical community. So from a commercial challenge, and what we really focused on what our biggest challenge was, is how do we make our solution fit into the existing workflow without causing any additional disruptions and maximum user ease, right? Now, that may sound very easy, but it's actually a lot more complicated than you can imagine.
Especially here stateside, right? With all of the different systems that we use and, all the different software programs that plug into that.
So absolutely. And we know that the healthcare system in the US or all over is currently stretched, right? With staff shortages and stuff like that. So you have to be able to provide a solution where there is no disruption to patient care. That's not an easy thing to do. So the way we approached it is we spent a significant amount of time on voice of customer. We made sure we spoke to every single hospital system that we could, the IT implementation teams, the radiologists, the radiographers, the sonographers, the cardiologists, to make sure that this fits in a seamless way without disrupting their current workflow. So that was by far our biggest commercial challenge to start off with.
So it was like having a commercial background myself. I love to ask this question. Who ultimately, I guess, would be the customer, and then who's the end user? And do you guys is there a reimbursement strategy in place here in the US yet? Is that something you guys are working on? And when I say ultimately the customer, is it exclusively marketed to hospitals, or is it going to be doctors' offices? Will they have for big practices, thriving practices that have their own, internal echo capabilities and whatnot? Will you be exclusively selling to the hospitals, and then or will that bleed out into some of the clinics and offices?
So the first thing we're doing, and as you know, the most expensive part about getting a new business off the ground is the resources. So we're not hoping to boil the ocean. We're going to 10 select states in the US to start off with, and these states make up at least 75% of all the TAVR procedures in the US. So our target market is principally all of your hospital systems and your IDNs, and we're also really focusing on the rural hospitals within those 10 states. And the reason is exactly what Professor Strange mentioned earlier. We want to make sure that there's equitable diagnosis of structural heart disease, irrespective of whether you're rural USA or in a large metro center. We also see a really good opportunity, Mike, with the ASCs, in particularly those that focus on the cardiology specialty. And we also believe that will hopefully help relieve some of the pressure on the public hospital systems. And the most interesting play we've had from a commercialization perspective is we've been approached by 2 or 3 of the large valve manufacturers that have expressed interest in helping us bring the solution to the market, because they get all the stats as well, right? So they know how many patients are being missed for these life-saving interventions. So there's a couple of conversations we're having on that level as well. Your question about the reimbursement. So currently the echo is reimbursed, the echo interpretation is reimbursed, and then the procedure is reimbursed. So there are existing CPT codes for that. What we are doing is we're also currently working with a reimbursement consultant to see if there's any additional, perhaps NTAP payments post FDA clearance. So that's underway as well.
Yeah, and that's usually, that's usually something that it takes a little bit of time. Our system is that they're not quick to grant that. It's one of those things where they usually like to see it come out and play out in the market, and then once they see the value in it, then that usually, as more players arrive in any given market, it drives awareness. So the competition, while it might be competition for each other, it also is contributing to the greater good of overall awareness within the system and validation of the therapy.
Absolutely agree. The other thing, just quickly, sorry to interrupt, guys, is the fact that we don't actually need the NTAP to be a successful business. That'll just be like gravy for us, right? There's existing reimbursement models in place, and we've also got a commercial model that compensates for that. It will just be a nice to have as opposed to a must have.
Yeah. To have that economic story.
I think, Mike, there's 2 things to add to that, which is really important. The first thing is that we published a paper in Lancet Healthy Longevity about a month and a half ago, and we've looked at the health economic component of not treating these patients, particularly with aortic stenosis, the hospitalization rates, the burden to the healthcare system, the heart failure related hospitalizations and subsequent care, the lack of input to society, the societal burden costs, And, published in the Lancet, it's got a fair amount of credibility with what we're producing, and it's really crystal clear. We've got to change the way we practice for structural heart disease, here specifically aortic stenosis. And if we are to truly have an impact in the health economic outcome, we need to find these patients in a uniform, systematic way. And that really will revolutionize both the economics for the institution. It's going to help the patients, obviously, from a survival and quality of life perspective. And of course, there's a win for the company commercially.
For the system as a whole as well. I mean, the system needs it.
Yeah, absolutely. The second point I was going to say is that once this system becomes integrated, and what Deon said, that primary area we needed to overcome was to not cause too much disruption, but to integrate this. Really, everybody that provides echocardiographic services will want this type of an algorithm plugged into their system, because it's going to become a benchmark on how to send your patients in a particular direction in a timely fashion that's related to risk, right? This is not just dealing with kind of algorithmic black box. This has actually been verified from a risk prediction perspective. So we're able to know when to do what. And the American Society of Echocardiography published about 6 months ago, saying that we need an alert system built in to every report that helps guide the referral process. And that's pretty much what this thing is. So I think it'll be universal once it gets its grip on the market.
This is going to sound like blasphemy, but I think what we're going to see is over the next 5-7 years, I think these AI programs that are coming out, and it's happening, across all the specializations. I mean, it's not just cardiac, but I think these AI programs, once they really get entrenched in the system and we start seeing the impact they're having, it'll become malpractice to not use it because of the obvious benefits, not just specifically with Echo IQ, but or cardiac, but across specialties. I think we're going to see it play out where, it will become beyond the standard of care, which is, it's exciting to think of the impacts that could have on the system as a whole. So I've heard some varying numbers, Deon. I know you guys are looking, forward looking into heart failure and also mitral regurgitation, correct?
Correct, yes.
Is it 3x the aortic market?
It certainly is 3x the aortic market, which is a really significant market. And I think the thing that's even more alarming with mitral is that the number of patients that get overlooked potentially or misdiagnosed is significantly higher than we do see with aortic stenosis. So if you listen to the companies like the Abbotts of this world and the Edwards of this world and Medtronics, they're all trying to infiltrate this market with new mitral clips coming out, right? There's a couple of new entrants in that space. And the reason they're doing it and investing in that space is because they know that this market's really large and there's a significant amount of underdiagnosis in that space. So once again, we think that AI will only benefit these patients in the long run. One of the things you have to keep in mind, Mike, is if you just go back to aortic stenosis as an example, for a patient who's got severe aortic stenosis where there's no intervention, there's a lot of research and data that now shows that these patients spend on average 11 days a year in hospital. So we have to find these patients. We have to do something. We also know that the interventions make a real difference. So I think it's complementary throughout the process.
Deon, if you can, just give us a little bit of insight as to what the commercial model is going to look like here in the US. Have you guys thought how you're going to approach that?
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. Absolutely, we have. So we've got a dual approach in the US, right? And I think it's really important for your listeners to get a thorough understanding of that. So the first thing that we get to do is we can look retrospectively over existing echoes. So every hospital has got what's called a PAC system, so a picture archiving system. We can run our AI across the existing echoes and then show which patients may have previously been overlooked. So that model does not require FDA. It's a quality assurance approach. And we've got two options there, right? They can either pay per scan done, or we've got a risk share approach for them, where they only pay for patients that our AI identified that may have previously been overlooked.
Okay.
So that's model number one. And then the second part that we're looking at is the real-time analysis. And we believe there's a really big opportunity here So this is post FDA. Once we get our FDA clearance, we can do real-time risk prediction at the time that they're doing the echo. And that's going to be on a sliding scale depending on the number of echoes that they perform per year. But I just want to add one thing here. Often when you look at innovation in healthcare, you'll see that most of the focus is on the tech, and we take tech from this level to the next level. We improve diagnosis or we improve speed, but the business models still stay exactly the same. So we really try to be a little bit different in this, because if you think about it, essentially we a SaaS business model, but we've stripped out all the components of a traditional SaaS model. So we've got no lock-in contracts. We've got a try before you buy option. We don't have any fixed monthly fees. So we've really tried to look at the business a little bit differently to make it easier for organizations to do business with a company like ourselves.
So they can basically pay as they go. There's a risk share if that's how they want to approach it. A lot of different ways that they can go about it. And then also if they want to just, kind of get their feet wet with the first model and then ultimately see the benefits in it, and then to the real-time analysis model, that's an option as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And we believe that first retrospective model will really show the value of the software and makes the transition to the real-time analysis so much easier, right? But that's the model we're going to the US
Now,
with.
will you guys begin selling that before the first model, before FDA approval, or do you have to wait for FDA approval?
No, we don't have to wait for FDA approval for the first model. So this actually just identifies the patients that are within the guidelines, right? So it doesn't do any of the risk prediction that Jeff and his team worked on. So that doesn't require FDA clearance. Once we start doing the AI component of these patients are at similar risk, that's when you have to get the clearance. And we're working through the agencies with that.
Got it. Well, this has been hugely informative. You guys, it looks like you've got it smells like a dead winter. And also, I know you guys have a lot of wood to chop ahead of you. I'd like to close with one question for each of you. And it's really the same question. What, from Dr. Strange, from your perspective, what's the biggest challenge that lies ahead from a clinical perspective? And then Deon, what's the biggest challenge that you think lies ahead from the commercial side? Dr. Strange, I'll let you go first. Yeah.
Wow, what a question. What's the biggest challenge from a clinical perspective that lies ahead? There's so many. But I think, being specific to this business and being specific to the stepping stones that we need to get across, there's been a huge, and I can't emphasize that word enough, a huge momentum shift globally around understanding aortic stenosis in the last 3 years. We were the first to publish a paper in the Journal of American College of Cardiology on the fact that moderate disease is as bad as severe disease. And so the globe has really changed its mind on understanding how the ventricle responds to this stiff valve. So that shift has allowed for a shift in thinking across all valvular diseases. So our challenge has been to overcome a 60-year dogma, really, around this dichotomy of you're either in or you're out. You either get treated or you don't. And how your ventricle responds is how it responds, and we try and figure that all out. But that challenge really has been overcome by the global community very recently. And so for us now, it's being able to take what we've learnt for aortic stenosis and apply it to mitral regurgitation, tricuspid regurgitation, and both systolic and diastolic heart failure. And we've made huge grounds on that internally, and we're really excited about what we're going to be able to bring next year to the market. But I think the clinical challenge is to understand that this is a multidimensional space. It's not just a singular dimension that the valve changes and we need to look at the valve. We need to take into account all of the response of the cardiac and pulmonary circulation as it relates to the outcome for the patient. And that's really where the globe is going. And I'm excited to be part of that wave that's making that change globally.
Yeah, Deon and I were talking about that a minute ago, how, these guidelines are 60 years old or whatnot. And, frankly, they don't reflect all of the information that's come to light over the last 60 years or whatever it's been. And it'll be interesting to see as technologies like this come to light, will that shift? Obviously there's a resistance to change in medicine because they really like their research, but at some point when more information, better information comes available, it's also got to be brought into the equation as well.
Well, when you think about new information, it's really important here. When you take those guidelines into account and the predicate base of information, the largest study before we started publishing our work was from the Mayo Clinic, and it was 622 patients. Our study's 26,000 patients across that spectrum of disease in a patient cohort of more than 1 million person years of follow-up. And then we're taking that even further now with the application of the artificial intelligence. And I think that the reluctance to change guidelines actually isn't now predicated on the lack of good data around the disease state. It's going to be the companies, Edwards, Medtronic, Abbott, that need to prove earlier intervention actually changes the outcome.
Changes the mortality, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So we've got to find these patients and do something with them.
Right.
The question really is what to do at what stage. And right now, that's why what Deon said, our challenge is to find all of those patients within current guidelines. And that we're missing nearly 70% of them. So we can deal with the other things down the track. Let's find those patients right now.
Or those patients that are guideline adjacent, tangential to the guidelines, and be able to monitor them. So once they do slip into the guidelines, then they can be treated and acted upon.
Absolutely.
Plan for the future. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Deon, how about you on the commercial side? What do you see as the biggest challenge moving forward?
I feel a little bit like I'm repeating myself with this one, Mike, but it really is important for us, knowing that the health system is under pressure from a resource and staff shortage perspective. So our biggest challenge remains, how do we implement our technology into the health system right now without causing any distraction from patient care or minimal distraction from patient care? Now, that's a process that we keep iterating and we keep trying to refine that, but that's by far our biggest challenge. We want to make sure that the focus remains on patient care, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we can implement the system because we know that it will improve patient care in the long run. So it's finding that balance and striking that balance. That's our biggest challenge.
Yeah, it's especially difficult over here, as fragmented as the U.S. system is. It's not, countries where they have nationalized medicine, it's a much easier process to roll something out. But when you've got 6 different systems and they all are not agnostic, they all have their own language and everything, it's a much more complex rollout. So I definitely understand that. Well, gentlemen, that's it for today. I greatly appreciate you guys taking the time to come on, and I'm going to enjoy watching you guys move forward in the marketplace. Can't wait for you guys to obviously submission later this year and then receive your approvals next year. Jeff, I know that this is your passion project. And so I know that's going to be a hugely proud moment for you. And I'd love to stay in touch with you guys. And maybe after you guys get your sea legs from a commercial perspective, we'll have you come back and do an update on the technology and how it's doing in the marketplace.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate it. And as you said, it's a passion project. We've got to change things, and we need to do that as soon as possible. Thanks for having us on,
Mike. Thanks for having us on.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode of The Bleeding Edge of Digital Health. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.